this evening with all of you for the first time in Shillong. My wife Nirmala and I, we were students in Jawaharlal Nehru University in the 70s. So we had a lot of students from the Northeast, really friends, colleagues in different ways. Used to hear quite a bit about Shillong, but never had a chance to come by here. But I think so it's really wonderful for me to be here in this historic city and what is really one of the core nodes of connectivity, knowledge, education in India's Northeast. So it's really great to be here, and thank you, Savya, for inviting me. I'm also thankful for Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia for his generous introduction and to share the panel with High Commissioner Philip Green. I mean, we were together in Singapore, since everyone is trying to look for connections with you. So we were at the same time in Singapore. So he's really been one of the most distinguished diplomats of Australia, and I think it's been great for India to have him here with us the last few years. What I thought I'll do is really in the next 15 or 20 minutes is really to focus on 5 broad themes. All of them kind of wound up out there in the complex title that we have. So essentially, I would say a word about the Indian Ocean, then I'll say a few words about Bay of Bengal, then about the emergence of China, how all this transforms, what has been the nature of U.S. response, and then look at what is India's choices and challenges as we look ahead. Now, I think to start with the Indian Ocean, school, the geography teacher tells us, the basic oceans in the world. There is Atlantic, Pacific, there is Indian Ocean, there is Arctic and Antarctic. If you're a Navy or if you served in the maritime domain, they tell you, look, there's actually only one sea in the world. That is not separate waters. Waters are connected. It is the in-between you have land, but really the world's waters are deeply connected. But I think purely for educational purposes or for delimiting our understanding of how we approach the study of these regions, it's good to separate them. But we shouldn't get overly fixated with the definition of these geographies, because as we debate there's Indian Ocean, there is Indo-Pacific, there is Bay of Bengal, but it's important to note all these are interconnected. And the geographic categories that we use are fluid in political terms. There are constant new terms that keep coming up. Now, if you ask our European friends, how they talk about Indo-Mediterranean, as India's relationship with Italy and Greece have grown in recent years. Is the linkages between Eastern Mediterranean, the Gulf, and the Arabian Sea have come into view. Strongly, there are people who talk about Indo-Mediterranean. Indo-Pacific was a term that was not popular for a long time, but there it is today. And within this broad rubric, there are also other geographies that come up. Today we talk about Red Sea Zone, Strait of Hormuz, or which actually the nature of politics in a local domain produce categories, and these categories are shifting all the time. But I think it's important to think of this as a contextual, referring to a certain period of time and a particular historic and political and economic context. And I think the peak of the idea of Indian Ocean and the Indian Ocean as an integrated domain was really with the British period, that where actually the Indian Ocean became the British lake after Britain defeated the French and the other European rivals, and you had actually with India at the center of the Indian Ocean, which was a colony of the British India with the British Empire, and that it was this relationship between Britain and India, one of the largest units in the world. I mean, at the time when it was integrated, when India became one, undivided India was one of the biggest physical entities in the international system, stretching from Aden to you have almost till Singapore at one point of time. So this was a vast, and including Burma at some points. So it's a vast zone that came together. And the resources of this vast landmass combined with the then sole superpower of the international system produced a structure and an order in the Indian Ocean as a structure of, you could understand in simple terms, in terms of trade, in terms of security, in terms of the overall political military developments. But this system got challenged with the rise of Japan. If you go back to the Second World War or the interwar period, the rise of Japan, and Japan's challenge to the British domination of the Indian Ocean. The Northeast was very much part of that history, and the contestation between a rising power in the East. Because the story of rise of Japan was really, until then we had the European powers which came to the Indian Ocean from the West. Japan was the first Asian power to rise, and it came towards the Indian Ocean through Bay of Bengal, occupied the Andaman Nicobar Islands, attacked through Burma, came all the way to the gates of Northeast. So it was a power that was coming from the East into the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean, and that was the big change that took place with the emergence of China, with the Japan. But the dominant power, Japan, got defeated, and the U.S. became the dominant power. The U.S. dominance of the world order after 1945, unfortunately, involved a fragmentation of how we think about Indian Ocean. The Americans were coming from a different direction. So for them, the priority areas were the Pacific, the Western Pacific, especially there, the Northeast Asia, its alliances with Japan and Korea and Australia, and on the western side with Europe. So the Indian Ocean fell between the stools of the new American map. Though occasionally they've made forays into the region, most of them for the Middle East, a focus of securing their interests in the Middle East after the British withdrawal from the east of Suez. So the region since then has remained a fragmented one, and I think India's withdrawal, in some sense, after independence from this region. The partition of India weakened India's position in the region, and then India's withdrawal from an active role, both economically, geopolitically, and militarily, also produced a region that was no longer connected. So the longer term, it is with India's rise, and what India does, it is going to produce a connected Indian Ocean. So I think a lot depends on the next generation of Indians. I mean, how we think of reconstituting with India at the center. I mean, I think a more prosperous and secure Indian Ocean region that includes the east coast of Africa, right all the way to Australia, that this region can be transformed must be transformed through India's rise, and what kind of policies that India will adopt. So that's the first point I wanted to make. Second, I think the Bay of Bengal, once the British dominated the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal became one of the most quietest areas in the world. That you had actually, though if you go back to the beginning of the 17th century or late 16th century, the early rivalries between the major European powers was mostly in Bay of Bengal, actually. As they were beginning to project themselves into the region, acquire foothold, the spice trade was mostly dealing with Aceh, the Indonesia, the struggle for the coast of Burma, the struggle for the coast of Tamil Nadu, what is now called the Carnatic coast at that time, and of course Bengal, which was really the prize, Bengal in a broadest sense. So the Bay of Bengal was really a zone of contestation. But once Britain prevailed over the European rivals, after the Napoleonic Wars, you saw then British power radiate out of Calcutta all across. As the High Commissioner said, there was one point Singapore was part of India. You had the Bengal presidency and the Madras presidency were really deeply connected to trade and a whole range of networks all across the Asia, and I think they became the dominant actors in this part. Today, just as China challenged that system, today there is a new power risen in the East, and it is the rise of China that's going to force, I think, a new order in this part of the world. And I think China's rise as a second largest economy, second largest military power, is going to have enormous consequences for this region, for India, for everyone in this part of the world. But I think there's an interesting parallel to the interwar period. If you see the interwar period, that is when Japan became a power, invaded, came almost into India, what was the configuration of forces? I mean, you had the British and the Americans, India and China, had to join hands to defeat the Japanese power. That is, but today's we don't think of in those terms, but the Indian Army, British Indian Army, collaborated with the Chinese National Army backed by American engineers who built the Stilwell Road, and the British, who were ousted from Singapore onwards, had to pull in every single resource in the world they had to restore the balance. So it took an enormous effort. But today, the actors are the same. But Japan is a key player in the Indo-Pacific. Australia is a key player in the Indo-Pacific. China is the dominant power. The British, because if you remove the British and put Americans there, it's the same cast of characters, but aligned in different ways, but actually looking to connect to see how the geopolitics of the Bay of Bengal will play out. Here again, Northeast and Bay of Bengal, I would say, are deeply connected. As we said, look, the rise of Japanese emergence as a maritime power, the need to come through Burma into the Northeast, the rise of now we're going to see the development of the island territories, India's own Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Australia's Cocos and Keeling, and the Christmas Island. So you're going to see actually the dynamic in the Northeast is going to be shaped by what happens in the maritime domain. And one of the great things that China has done, as it developed, Chinese themselves are landlocked. If you look at it, they had a big coast on the Western Pacific, but the rest of it is landlocked. So China's own effort has been, how does it connect its inland areas to the Indian Ocean? They've at least tried out 3 or 4 corridors. The China-Myanmar corridor, which is actually connecting Sichuan and China, Southwest China, to the Bay of Bengal. In fact, if you go to Kunming, there are big focus on studies of Bay of Bengal, of Indian Ocean, what's happening there. The second corridor is the China-Nepal corridor. That is, you get to the markets of the great Himalayan plains to be able to come down to do business and eventually get to Calcutta, which becomes your port of entry into the Bay of Bengal. A third corridor that China has developed is through Arabian Sea. The China-Pakistan corridor, of course, CPEC, that everyone is familiar with. And now they're talking about a Iran-China corridor where you can come into the Gulf in partnership with. So what you're having is, I don't think we should think in terms of a separation between landlocked regions and maritime regions. Actually, the rise of China is forcing a kind of sort of twisting together the great Eurasian landmass and the Indian Ocean by sheer economic reasons. So if you think of India's northeast, China, southwest China, northern Burma, upper highlands of Southeast Asia, these are all far from the sea. But in the new geopolitical churn, they're all going to be connected in a very, very deep way to the Indian Ocean. And I think we should see the integrative forces rather than separating them out. Because Northeast is landlocked, it has nothing to do with the maritime. It will have everything to do with the larger geopolitics. So the rise of China, I think, and China's entry is into the Indian Ocean begins in Bay of Bengal. The Malacca Straits is central for the Chinese. So therefore, what the Chinese are doing is really to step up the presence. Of course, their first military base is in Djibouti, in the Red Sea area. But they're also, they see the entry point into the Indian Ocean east to the Bay of Bengal. After all, South China Sea and Bay of Bengal are next to each other. They're almost like antechambers in the central parts of the Indo-Pacific. So you're going to see a lot more activity of the Chinese. If you ask our Navy, they tell you the Chinese naval activity around the Andaman Sea, Andaman Islands is big. They're building ports, they're building infrastructure. For example, in Burma, at the Chakpu Island, where India is trying to develop Sitwe Airport, the Chinese are quite further down with what they do in the Chakpu Airport, Chakpu Port, and the pipelines that they've built connecting Kunming region to the Arabian Sea. So I think you have a lot of activity going on in this part of the Bay of Bengal. Many of it will have huge consequences because China is not just another country. Today, second largest economy. It's the rapidity of China's military modernization and its ability to produce outcomes through military, technological, and other means has dramatically increased. So that's a new reality, and I think so. It's not a question of whether we deal with China or not. We have to deal with the Chinese power, and we shouldn't be. A lot of Indians sometimes we say, "How are the Chinese coming into the Indian Ocean?" I think if the Dutch, the Portuguese, the British, and the French can come, of course the Chinese will come. It's part of their structure as the world's largest trading nation. I think you can argue with the consequence of China's rise, but you can't say Chinese have a legitimate right, like any other great power, to be in this part of the world. The question is how we deal with it. Is the question not saying is it legitimate or is wrong? As they say, look, Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. Just as South China Sea is not China Sea. That the great powers, when they rise, they're going to come to different corners of the world. Given China's interest in the Middle East, its interest in Africa, you're going to see more and more Chinese presence in this part of the world. And that's going to be a reality we have to come to terms with. So before I come to the Indian response, what we need to do, just a word about the US. You have Trump too. I'm sure last year and a half we had nothing but Trump on our newspapers, and the whole debates everywhere is about what Trump is doing. So I think there are interesting ways Trump is both a discontinuity as well as a continuity there. I mean, I think there's so much focus on the discontinuity. For example, unlike the previous administrations, the Trump's approach to international trade has been fundamentally different. Unlike the previous administrations, which focused on alliances and partnership, Trump thinks alliances are really not, most of them are free riders. He doesn't have to spend so much time cultivating allies and friends. He thinks actually US can do it all on its own. If the previous Trump administration and the Biden administration talked about building coalitions in the Indo-Pacific, whether it's a Quad or AUKUS or you name it, to build regional coalitions to balance Chinese power. Trump seems to think he can do a direct deal with Xi Jinping, and I think you're going to see a lot in the next 2 weeks. Trump is going to go to Beijing on the 14th, 15th of this month. So you're going to see how that plays out. But the attitude of how Trump thinks about the world, thinks about Asia, seem to suggest a profound discontinuity. But does that mean the Indo-US relationship will simply doesn't matter? Here I think it's actually, I don't think we should jump to that kind of conclusion. But if you look at actually India-US relations, while Trump's language, his diplomatic style have created a sense of anxiety and unease, but if you look at the actual numbers, the relationship is not doing too badly. You have actually, the trade is booming between India and the US. Notwithstanding the tariffs, we have actually for the first time an interim trade agreement between India and the US, which we couldn't do under Trump 1. A 10-year defense framework agreement has been recently signed. We're going to have a Quad ministerial meeting that again I think will take place in the middle of this month, when you have Secretary Rubio is going to be here along with the Japanese and the Australian counterparts. So things are not as bad as they look, but the optics of the relationship, clearly Trump's style has created some impact. My own sense is that I don't think we don't have a vote in the US election. So it's not for us to say Trump is a good guy or a bad guy. You deal with it. If he's the number one power as a crazy guy, you have no choice but to deal with it. Right? So it's not something saying, dismissing him or no, he's a reality for the next 2.5 years. And who knows what happens after that. So, as we said, there's an Arab friend who was the other day saying, look, even if a monkey sits in the White House, we have to deal with the monkey. It's the power of the US system. The US capacities. Today you see that 10,000 miles away, what the US is doing in the Persian Gulf. Single-handedly, no allies, no partners, is doing it all alone. So its capacity to deliver military power, to change global economic equations is a reality. So therefore the question for us is, how do we deal with that reality? Rather than saying is Trump good guy or bad guy, it shouldn't really matter to us, because that's an American citizen's right. If they think this guy's crazy, they'll throw the rascals out, as they say. But for us, as long as he's in power, we have to deal with that reality. And I think by the time Trump leaves, the global trading system would have changed. The global military structure would have changed. The multilateral system would have changed. So I think that is the real thing. There I would think, as India's own power increases, we are in a good position. But the question is, how do we navigate that world rather than, run away from it, or hoping like hell the previous world will come back. It's not going to come. So I would say just conclude the thing in terms of India's challenges. One, we got to keep dealing with the changes in the great power relations. The US-China relationship, the US-Russia relationship will keep changing. If you look at last 100 years, there was a time when America and Russia were friends against Germany. They're enemies many times. They're partners in the Detente period. So it's never been a single unchanging relationship. If you look at US-China relationship, as I said, US and China collaborated in the Second World War. So they too have had a history of ups and downs. So that is the reality. So there will always be changes. The question is, are we in a better position to deal with it? My sense is, if our national capabilities grow, we will be in a better position to deal with the shifts that takes place between US, China, and Russia. The second, I think, is on the economic side, that the global trading system is changing. Therefore, how do we reform ourselves internally? How do we produce economic reform at home that can take care of India's economic interests globally? And I think that is the big challenge. The answer is not simply saying, if the WTO is not going to come back, the question for us is, how do we reform our own economy to be able to deal with a changing world? On security, I think when Trump is talking about allies matter less, that doesn't mean we simply say that, look, Quad is not going to work. Quad is going to work to some extent. We're going to have India and Australia, India and Japan. We have to do more with ourselves. Because look, Americans will come and go. Like just the Britain left in 1968. It is what we do within the region. Because India is going to be here. Australia is going to be here. We have the shared waters of the Eastern Indian Ocean. Japan is going to be here. Indonesia is going to be here. So we have to find ways, irrespective of what the Americans do. If Americans are there, helping is good. But if they don't want to be there, that doesn't mean we give up, throw up our hands and say, start mourning. What we need to do is we need to do more with each other. That is what India, Australia must do more with each other. India, Japan must do more with each other. Trilaterally, bilaterally, triangular, whichever fashion we can. We need to take charge of our own region. And I think this is the meaning of burden sharing that Trump talks about. When Trump says, guys, you got to do more for yourself. I think for us there's an opportunity actually to say we do more for ourselves. We strengthen ourselves. We create conditions for peace and prosperity in the region on our own steam. And that will actually make us easier to deal with the shifting dynamics of US relationship with China and Russia. So I think the future in that sense is in our hands. It is what we do within ourselves. That I think therefore the focus must be on how we strengthen ourselves internally. How do we work closer with our neighbors? With Bangladesh, for example. I can't imagine a scenario where India can be a major actor in a look east policy without strong, positive, productive relationship with Bangladesh. I'm a hopeful guy. I mean, I could be wrong, but we have the same government for the first time in Delhi and Calcutta after 50 years. Not since 1977, there's been a same government in Delhi and Calcutta. There's a historic shift. We have the same governments in Delhi, Calcutta, and Guwahati, if you will. So I think this is actually an opportunity, I think. And we also have new rulers in Dhaka. We have new rulers in Kathmandu to take a fresh look at this region. That is today, how do we work together within the country, I'm talking about first, and then work with the others to see, look, how do we transform this region on the basis new initiatives, on the basis of common sense, on the basis of pragmatism. That means go back to first principles, to rework our region, seizing the opportunities that exist, because the change in the global trading system, the change in the global security order, do demand that we act in our own region. And I think the political change in Delhi, in Calcutta, and around us, I think gives us an opportunity to take a fresh look at regional cooperation, at sub-regional cooperation, to see, look, where do we go from here. And within that, I would think the Northeast will be quite central in terms of how we connect Northeast to itself first, to the mainland, and to the regions around it will play a very, very critical part. I think I'll stop here and show the Commission.